Welcome. Good evening, everyone. So you can hear me. Yogesh, you can hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, Swami.
Very good, very good. So, Om Parthaya Pradibodhidam Bhagavada Narayanena Swayam Vyasena Gradidam Purana Muninam Madhye Mahabharatam Advaidam Radavarshinim Bhagavadim Ashtadashadhyayinim Ambatva Manusandadhami Bhagavad Gita Bhavadveshinim Yam Brahma Varunendra Rudramarudastunyanti Divyaistavai Vede Sangapadakramopaniषदे गायन्ति यं सामगाः ध्यानावस्थित तद्गतेन मनसा पश्यन्ति यं योगिनो यस्यान्दं न विदुःसुरासुरगणा देवाय तस्मै नमः. So we are approaching the end of this 8th chapter that we've been discussing for some time, a very important chapter. We should remember that the 8th chapter is in a way a kind of a direct dialogue. Arjuna asks 7 questions. You'll find in the first and the second verses, the beginning, first sloka and second sloka. Arjuna is putting 7 questions to the Lord Krishna, his teacher. Kim tad brahma, kim adhyatmam, kim karma, purushottama, adhibhutam cha kim proktam, adhidaivam kim uchyate. Adhyajna katham kotra, degesmin madhusudana, prayanakale cha katham nyeyosi niyatatmadhi. So, a very, very interesting discussion. In fact, this is a prelude to the next chapter, which is a very significant chapter in the Gita, the 9th chapter. So, what is Brahman? And what is Adhyatma? What is karma? And what is Adhibhuta? And what is Adhidaiva? Adhiyajna. And again, who is Adhiyajna and in what way this Adhiyajna exists in this body? Prayanakale cha katham jnayosi. And at the time of death, how is the absolute reality known? These are the very, very interesting questions. So, the answer is simple. What is Adhibhuta? What comes and goes? The world of objects. That is Adhibhuta. And Adhidaiva is nothing but that spark of the absolute reality which exists in the body, which makes it a living entity. So, that is Adhidaiva. And Adhiyajna, that absolute reality, Atman itself, exists in all of us in the form of the active force, Adhiyajna. Now, these are some of the interesting subjects, and the answer is also very simple. What is Aksharam? Aksharam, the indestructible, the ultimate reality, Brahman. We have been discussing this, of course, this imperishable reality, the supreme infinite reality is Brahman. Karma is nothing but the vibration of the power, the active force, the creative and the evolutionary activity. So we discussed this. Now, the importance of these 7 questions is brought out by Shankaracharya in his commentary. So he says, for example, in the commentary, Shankaracharya says, because it's important to understand and keep in mind these questions and then answers, because that is the key to understanding the importance and the significance of the last verse of this chapter, that is 28th verse. Shankaracharya says, for example, Vedeshu samyak adhideshu yajneshu cha sadgunnena anushthideshu tapassu cha sutapteshu daneshu cha samyak datteshu yat eteshu punyaphalam punyasya phalam punyaphalam pradishtam shastrena atyedi aditya gacchadi tat sarvam phalajadam idam viditva sapta prashana nirnayadvarena uktam. That is sapta prashna nirnayadvara. Sapta prashna nirnaya means by deciding on the basis of these 7 questions put by Arjuna and the answers given by Lord Krishna. That is the absolute reality. So those who know the answers to these 7 questions, and those who know the mystery of the twofold paths that every dead soul takes after death, the path of return and the path of non-return, is called Krishna Gati and Shukla Gati respectively. They attain, they get the transcendental knowledge and they reach the ultimate liberation even in this world, even while living in this world. It's a very, very significant revolutionary concept that you find in the Gita, that is expressed in the 28th verse, which is the last verse and one of the most significant verses in the Gita. What it essentially tells us is simple. Once we understand this, then we can slowly proceed from 27 to 28, 26, 27, 28. Lord Krishna says, it's not enough to understand the eschatology of human life. Eschatology is that branch of philosophy which deals with the ultimate destiny, what happens to you after death, and so on. It's not that somebody is waiting to receive you and put you in a hell or admit you into heaven. That's not the way Vedanta approaches eschatology. Based on our activities here, based on how we live here in this world, we will get the ultimate result. In other words, it has a direct link to how we live and what we do, what we speak, whether we live a life of purity and unselfishness without doing harm to anybody. Then we will have the ultimate destiny. I already discussed this in the previous sessions. First of all, 2 direct options are presented in the Gita in the earlier verses. In Sanskrit, we call it Shukla Gati and Krishna Gati. In other words, the northern path and the southern path. You must have heard of the Uttarayana and Dakshinayana. Those who live a normal life, do their duty with some expectations, with some results. Of course, living more or less a disciplined life. In olden days, yajnas and yagas and different rituals they used to perform. So how do we understand that idea in our present 21st century context? Let's say there are those who work in different areas, in the hospitals, in the factories, in the universities, in the information IT centers and so on. They do their job, they have a definite plan and they expect the result, they draw their salary and then of course, they don't particularly give much importance to unselfishness or anything like that, but they don't do any harm to anybody. They do certain things and they expect some results. What happens to them? They follow the southern path. It is called Krishna Gati. Krishna in Sanskrit means Krishna actually means the dark one, and Shukla means the white one. That means so. Dakshinayana. It is called the Krishna Gati or the southern path. They follow Dhumo Ratris Tada Krishna. Shanmasa Dakshinayana we find here. We already discussed this, so I am not going to repeat the path of smoke, night time, dark fortnight, 6 months, then passage in sun. And then of course they go, they slowly reach some higher realms. They enjoy the good results of their good actions performed and done in this life. And sometimes they, of course, they have to suffer for their bad actions. But they come back again, they are born again in this world and they continue their journey. I mean, it's just like a wheel, rotating wheel. There is no special progress in their spiritual evolution. It's called the southern path. It's called Dakshinayana. Then there is Uttarayana. Those of you who have read Mahabharata, for example, the Bhishma, he is waiting for the Uttarayana to begin. When the sun is in the Uttarayana, the northern path. And then because he was a such, he was a great yogi, so he can decide his own time of death. So he waited. When the Uttarayana started, he decided to leave this body, and he reaches, they said, you can find the 24th verse, Agnir Jyoti Rakas Shukla Shanmasa Uttarayanam Tatra Prayata Gichanti Brahma Vidojana means. So what happens to them? The fire, the flame, daytime and bright fortnight and 6 months of the northern passage of the sun, taking that path, the nobles of Brahman slowly go to Brahmaloka. This is what happens. And slowly they will reach the highest spiritual realization. They don't have to return to the world again. They don't have to be born again. They come out of this wheel of samsara, this birth, life, death and rebirth. It's called Uttarayana. Of course, Devayana is another name for Uttarayana and Pitrayana is another name for Dakshinayana. Now, what I want to tell you right now is something interesting. When you read scriptures like Gita and Upanishads, there are two types of teachings that you come across. Certain teachings are linked to certain belief systems, maybe in ancient India, among the great sages of ancient India. And they are just stated. We don't have any clear rational explanation of this in any of the commentaries of the Gita or Upanishads, except based on what are presented in the text. Shankaracharya also, of course, in his Upanishad commentaries, of course, he also mentions this, and also Gita commentary also. But this is one kind of teaching. Of course, great scholars like one of the greatest scholars born outside India, the great Japanese scholar Hashima Nakamura, he has written extensively on this in his early history of Advaita Vedanta and many other books. So some of them take it in a very rational way, but I'm not. In fact, great modern saints like Swami Vivekananda mentioned, well, it's not clear what they really mean in our present day context, but I'm presenting in front of you what the scriptures say. Then, of course, this is one category of teachings, things which are linked to the belief systems of ancient India. This is one such. There is another kind of teaching that is very rational, very scientific, and very universal. For example, there is a divine reality present in all of us. If you live a pure life, if you practice yamas and niyamas, the great spiritual values, which we discussed many times earlier. If you are not clear, you can ask questions during interaction. If you practice some of the highest moral and spiritual values, then we can manifest this divinity present in all of us. The world is one spiritual family. All these great spiritual ideas, which actually form the central focus, the central theme of the Upanishadic literature, these teachings are very rational, very scientific, and they continue to inspire modern world. You can find many writers and philosophers, not just Sanskrit scholars, but even modern philosophers like Aldous Huxley, who wrote Perennial Philosophy and so many books. Many who wrote Otto, who translated Meister Eckhart's works into modern English. So you find many of these great modern writers have explained, and this was the great message that Vivekananda, the great philosopher saint of 19th century Vivekananda, who brought to the Western world and spread. So that is the central theme of the Gita, the central universal spiritual teachings of the Vedanta philosophy. So I mentioned this because in astronomical language, Uttarayana and Dakshinayana will make some sense. But in terms of eschatological idea, in terms of what happens to a person after his death, we have no clue, we have no way to rationally understand the Uttarayana and Dakshinayana, because after Mahabharata's times, we don't find this mentioned so elaborately with so much emphasis in any of the scriptures. So in the Mahabharata, you can find a long description of this in the context of Bhishma's passing away. So that is an important thing to remember. Now the 26th verse tells you, it just says, Sukla Krishne Gati Hede Jagata Shashvades Mate Ekayadi Anavrutim Anyaya Avartade Punaha. These two parts, Krishna Gati and Shukla Gati, the southern path and the northern path. The northern path leads you to a state of liberation gradually. It's called Krama Mukti. Slowly you will reach Brahma Prapti. It's called Archiradi Marga Devayana. That is northern path, the Shukla Gati. It takes you to a point of no return. You will be gradually liberated from the wheel of birth, life, death and rebirth. But the Krishna Gati, it is just like going and coming back. The 27th verse is important. We are coming to the end of this chapter. Naidesudi Parthajanan Yogi Muhyadi Kaschana Satasma Sarveshu Kaleshu Yoga Yukto Bhavarjuna. It's a very famous verse. Tasma Sarveshu Kaleshu Yoga Yukto Bhava. Means, Arjuna, you always practice yoga. So what is yoga? Yoga mentioned here is something different from the path of Krishna Gati or Shukla Gati. It is the real spiritual life. Meditation. After meditation, prayer and all these practices, we gradually enable us to realize the supreme reality and to attain liberation here in this world, even while living in this world. That's called Sadhya Mukti or Jivan Mukti. So, two types of liberation are mentioned here in this text in 8th chapter. Of course, there are in Jivan Mukti, Viveka and Brahma Sutra Bhashyas and the Brihadaranyaka, Chandogya and other books, Bhashyas especially, you find many other kinds of liberation are mentioned, but in this particular 8th chapter, two types of liberation, freedom from this wheel of samsara, the wheel of transmigratory cycle are mentioned. One is Krama Mukti, the other is Jivan Mukti. Krama means gradual. And that is explained in the 24th verse. Agnir Jyoti Raha Shukla Shanmasa Uttarayanam. Tatra Prayada Gichandi Brahma Vido Janaka. Means a person's body is put in fire. So fire comes. That is Agni. Archis is, sometimes archis is used to denote the curve in the bright flame when a dead person's body is burned to ashes. So that's the beginning of a journey. In fact, his own actions, a dead person's actions, the results, not action, but the results, punya papa, they actually open a freeway, a highway in front of him, in front of her. And that road slowly takes him gradually, it's called Krama Mukti, means gradual liberation. It takes him through Agni, then Jyoti flame, then Aha daytime, then Uttarayana, and then it's called 6 months, and slowly he will reach Brahmaloka, and slowly at the end of that particular cycle, Kalpa, he will merge with Brahman and will be liberated once for all. It is Krama Mukti, gradual liberation. Now everyone may not aspire for it. There are those who never cared for any serious spiritual practices. They did their work, they expected the result. They follow the Shuklagadi, then they be born again. Again, it's not damnation, eternal damnation or hellfire, burning fire, and somebody pushing you into some kind of a cauldron where you scream, you cry and weep, and somebody punishing you, subjecting you to painful experiences. That sort of thing is not mentioned in the Gita. Such things are mentioned in the Purana literature, mythological literature, but they are dismissed as secondary or insignificant by the author of Gita and also by the commentators like Shankaracharya. So here, every person has a chance, there's a scope for everyone to eventually get the highest spiritual liberation. If a person doesn't get an opportunity to pray or meditate, what happens? Still, if he lives a normal life, he'll come back, but based on some of the good actions he has done in this life, he'll be born in a family, born in a set of circumstances where he could continue his spiritual journey from where he has left in his previous life. That means nothing is lost, you are never late, you always have a chance. But you should not say, I should have liberation now and right now, today, this morning. That's not going to happen. So this belief in the law of karma and the belief in the doctrine of reincarnation. These are two significant principles which form the key to understand the philosophy of life in this, depicted in these verses. So those who could not practice, they will die, but they will be born again if they have done a lot of good things. Suppose you practice some meditation, but not enough. Then you will be born in a family where your parents will encourage you to meditate. Because on the strength of the good actions, the results you are accumulated in this life, you will be fit to be born in a family. You will be fit to be born in a set of circumstances where you will gradually, inevitably, you will be compelled to continue your spiritual journey. But if you have already well established in spiritual life, then you won't be born again. Eventually, you will be liberated. So that gradual liberation is called Krama Mukti. The Jivan Mukti is something different. That's what we are going to discuss in the 28th verse. In the 27th verse, Lord Krishna says, he is making the background for introducing the great principle, the great idea that is depicted in the 28th verse. The 27th verse, Lord Krishna says, Naidesudi parthajanan yogi mukhyadi kaschana. That means, yogi is never deluded. Who is that yogi? Yogi is the one who meditates. Anyone who has lived a spiritual life, he is not so much deluded, he is not worried about his fate. So, he can remain calm and quiet. Yoga means samatvam yoga uchyate. The ability to practice equanimity of mind, even in the midst of negative circumstances, even in the midst of problems and difficulties. If we can focus on our duty, because we should remember these problems, these difficulties, they all belong to the relative plane. The momentary, the relative, they are not absolute realities. Our true nature goes beyond worldly empirical concerns. That's our true nature. And if we try, we can become a yogi. Such a person who has focused his mind on higher spiritual liberation is called a yogi. Such a person, he is never deluded. He doesn't worry. He doesn't worry whether he is going to hell or heaven because he is living a spiritual life. There is neither hell nor heaven mentioned here. You live your life, you can build your own future, your own spiritual future. It's not in the hands of somebody. That's a very wonderful message that you get from the Gita. I don't know the scriptures will tell you. We can build our own spiritual destiny. It doesn't mean that we arrogantly say that I am God or anything. Nothing of the kind. Because the idea that we can and we have to build our own spiritual destiny, it puts a big responsibility on ourselves. We have to take care of our actions, our behavior, our words and thoughts. We can't say I shall, for some days I shall do something, then I can just ask for mercy, I can ask for forgiveness. No. Forgiveness, all these ideas are mentioned here, but the point is we can take care of our life, our thoughts, our actions and words. Then we become fit for this life of yoga. And such a person is never deluded. He considers his moksha, liberation, as the supreme goal in his life. Because he has understood that there are these two parts. If he doesn't care for any spiritual values, he'll come back, he'll be born again in this world, he'll have to continue life maybe in a different place, different nationality, different race, speaking a different language, but life as such won't be qualitatively different. But if he cares for some higher spiritual practices, then he will enter a realm from where he won't have to be born again and continue the same journey. Now, this is perhaps one of the most significant verses in the Gita and the most significant verse in the 8th chapter. Vedeshu yajneshu tapassu chaiva daneshu yat punya phalam pradishtam attedi tatsarvamidam viditva yogi param sthanam upaidi chadyam. A yogi who meditates on the supreme reality, he has known that there are these two paths. One path that it will take after his death, the northern path that will take him gradually to liberation, and the southern path that will make him come back again to be born as a human being or in some other species. Those who know this, that is the secret of coming back and the secret of gradual liberation, is called krama mukti. What happens, such a person, he will meditate on the supreme reality. He won't care for anything else. He will care only for the highest spiritual liberation. such a person can be liberated even while living in this world. It is called Jivan Mukti, Jivan Nabi Mukti. How do we understand in the normal language? Suppose you are working in Intel or Microsoft or in whatever company it could be, in any field or activity, you are 20, maybe 15 hours, 16 hours, 20 hours you are working every day and still be spiritually liberated. How do we make sense of this idea? That's the meaning of Jivan Mukti. You are living in this world, you are doing everyday work, duties and responsibilities, still you can be liberated, you are already liberated. What it means is, such a yogi, he realizes the fact that his true nature is not this body, mind, intellect or his emotions and feelings and so on. These are all false identifications. Not that we run away from life. We won't run away from life. We won't run away from duties and responsibilities. But we will be able to look upon our life and everything around us from a higher perspective. When we look upon our own life, our duties, our work, everything from a higher perspective, what happens is, we won't be surprised when a difficulty or a problem arises in any situation. We will be able to absorb it. We will be able to take it in our stride. Because we won't expect perfection from an imperfect world. We won't expect anything permanent in an imperfect world. So, not that we will keep away from our duties, not that we will be indifferent. We won't be indifferent. You find some of the greatest karma yogis, I would say, and I'm using only modern language, some of the most successful men and women of action were Jivan Muktas. Look at a man, the Shankaracharya himself, who wrote this commentary. 32 years. And the amount of work he did. If you look at the history of Christian monastic orders, Ignatius Loyola, one of the greatest, and he founded one monastic order. Shankaracharya founded 10 monastic orders. He is the author of the most profound, the most abstract philosophical classics in Sanskrit language. And he is the most profound, the most wonderful devotional poet. 65 of the most moving devotional poems were written by Shankaracharya. Traveling all over Indian subcontinent 4 times, all the way from southern tip of India to northern part and east to west. Founding 4 monasteries in 4 distant corners of India. And of course debating with agnostics and atheists, Charvakas, Mimamsakas, Shunyavadins, Vijnanavadins and so on. And this man lived only 32 years. Oh, look at Vivekananda. Vivekananda till 1893, Vivekananda was in India. Till 1882, he was a student who went on questioning God and who didn't even accept Advaita, Vedanta or anything. In 1893 he came to America, and 1902 he passed away. And he is the one who actually brought Indian philosophy outside Indian subcontinent. So I'm not extending the list. Why did this ever liberated while living in this world? That is maybe a rough translation of the Sanskrit word Jivan Mukti, Sadhyo Mukti. How do we explain this? Because they did everything, but they did everything as a natural way of practicing karma yoga. See, when you do all the most difficult task, still you don't identify yourself as the one who is doing it and as the one who is going to enjoy the benefits of your actions, then you can conserve a lot of energy. you won't feel you have done a lot of work even after you have done so much of work. It helps you to conserve energy. That's the mystery why these Jivan Muktas were perhaps the most hardworking specimens of humanity in the whole history of the world. Because they could do so much and they never felt they were doing anything. Actually, when we do work and when we feel we have done so much, then we become tired and fatigued. Suppose you can do everything as a play, as the Jivan Muktas were doing, then we won't feel the impact of our own exertion. Anyway, that's a different subject. Now, here, of course, these words are important, so I shall try to explain this in the light of Shankaracharya's own commentary. The verse is very important. So, those of you who got the text, we can remember. The verse is Vedeshu Yajneshu Tapassu Chaiva Daneshu Yat Punya Phalam Pradishtam Atyedi Tat Sarvamidam Viditva Yogi Param Sthanam Upaidi Cha Atyam. What it means is Param Adyam Sthanam Upaidi. The yogi attains the highest and the most fundamental place, means the highest form of liberation. And he says, Lord Krishna says, that yogi Atyedi, he goes beyond. What he attains is beyond certain things. First of all, he understands the full meaning of the 7 questions that I discussed this at the beginning of this class. Arjuna put 7 questions to Lord Krishna, and Lord Krishna answers 7 questions. The first and second verse contain the questions, and the subsequent few verses the answers, which I'm not going through them again. So a yogi understands the implications of these 7 questions and 7 answers. And he also understands the mystery. He will understand the mystery of this northern part and the southern part. And then he decides, I can be liberated even when I'm living in this world. So the verse tells you, whatever meritorious results are declared in the scriptures that you will enjoy as a result of studying the Vedas, or performing yajnas, or practicing austerities and giving away gifts, practicing charity and philanthropy. The yogi's attainments goes beyond all this. The yogi will attain something much superior. He will attain the transcendental spiritual merit because he attains the supreme truth. There are a few words mentioned here. Vedeshu, Vedas, Rigveda, Yajurveda, Samaveda and Atharvaveda. So Shankaracharya says Vedeshu, Sammik, Adhideshu, Vedeshu means those who study the Vedas, the 4 Vedas and the Vedangas and Upavedas. All the subsidiary texts. And then there are those who practice a number of rituals. Most people study the Vedas to perform rituals. Of course, a number of rituals are mentioned in the Vedic texts. They are called Sapta Havir Yajna, Sapta Soma Yajna. Means, Agnyadhana, Agnihotra, Desavurnamasa, Agrayana, the Chaturmasya, Niruddha, Pashubandhu, Sautramani. These are all called Sapta Havir Yajna. Means when you practice these Vedic rituals, you have to offer something to the fire. It could be what we call dathi or yogurt, milk, cooked food, cooked grains, cooked food, and many items are offered as Havih, which is offered. It's called Sapta Havir Yajna, 7 types of yajnas. Some of them are still being practiced in some parts of India, not all of them perhaps. And then there are Sapta Soma Yajnas. Agnishtoma, Agnyatnishtoma, Uktya, Shodashi, Vajapeya, Adhiratra, Aptoyama, etc. I'm not going to those details. These are different yajnas. And it is said that if you practice these ancient Vedic rituals mentioned in the books, the Kalpa Granthas or the Granthas, then you will go to heaven. These are all written in books to encourage people to practice these ancient Vedic rituals. Some of them still survive, but some of them have become more or less extinct in many parts of India. Maybe they are still existing in some places. Then there are Vedic vratas are there. Tapa. Tapa actually means, this Kritsra, Chandrayana, etc. Certain practice of austerities, upavasa. Upavasa means practice of fasting and denying certain physical comforts to yourself is kind of tapa. Then there are many other rituals, Mahayajna, Bhutayajna, Nriyajna, Devayajna, Rishiyajna, Pitriyajna. All this, you give you practice certain rituals as a token of indebtedness to the great sages who have preserved the Vedas, departed souls, and also the heavenly beings, and so on. There are Pakayajnas, Ashtaga, Sthalipaga, Stavana, Grahini, Khaitri, Parvana, Ashwayudha. I am not going to those details. What I mean to say, Lord Krishna says, the yogi, the one who meditates on the supreme reality, the one who one who focuses on his transcendental spiritual identity. I am Atman. I am not this body-mind complex. He's a yogi. That yogi gets the results which transcend, which go beyond the collective meritorious results of all these ancient Vedic rituals. So it is called Phalasudi in certain scriptures in India. The last verse will be a summary of the central theme of the text, and also will give you an idea of what will be the benefits that you derive when you study the scriptures. See, you are expected to do everything without benefit, without thinking of benefit. But to make you do that, you should be told, if you practice Karma Yoga, you get some result. Karma Yoga itself means you should practice your duty without any expectation for result. So these verses are very important. Some of you, when you read this, you may think, what is yajna? Yajnas are certain rituals and practices and belief systems which traditionally practiced by ancient sages in India. As I made outline just now. They also include certain practices to be followed by every householder. Every householder should do something to preserve the ancient tradition. It's called Deva Yajna or called Rishi Yajna. The great sages who have discovered great spiritual truths. We should study those scriptures and we should teach others, encourage others to study those scriptures. That is how we pay back to the ancient spiritual lineage. When a great teacher who has taught you something without expecting any tuition fee, you are not paid anything. He has taught you something. These great spiritual treasures constitute the heritage of our spiritual culture and civilization. How do we pay back to them? How do we express our gratitude? The great sages and philosophers, by teaching them. How do we show our gratitude, Aristotle and Socrates? Not by giving up, not by taking away Latin and Greek from all the university syllabi. We should introduce their works. We should introduce these classical works. We should make it possible for students to study the great classics. That's how we pay back our indebtedness. That's how we thank this, express of gratitude, the great philosopher of ancient times. So all these are called yajna, So, and also we should look after fellow human beings. We should be compassionate towards living creatures called Bhuta Yajna. Nri Yajna, we should practice hospitality to other fellow human beings and so on. So all this, Lord. So Shankaracharya says, and also charity, dana. Dana means philanthropy, and one should practice dana, means charity, generosity. You should give to persons certain things useful to them, but you should be very careful to whom you are giving, and should be done with great humility and a sense of sanctity and sacredness. We should practice generosity and philanthropy. It's called dana. So all these will produce results. And Lord Krishna says, a yogi, a person who has focused his whole life on the highest spiritual ideal, the yogi excels all these practitioners of austerity, philanthropy, charity, everything. Because the yogi practices meditation on the supreme divine reality that is present in everyone, that is present everywhere. So every moment he experiences his affinity, his identity with the entire creation. He looks upon the whole creation as one spiritual family. That yogi is superior to all others. That's why Shankaracharya says, Shastrena Atyedi Aditi Gachri Tat Sarvam Phalajadam Idam Viditva Sapta Prasana Nirnaya Dwarena Uttam. So all these have been discussed in the early part of each chapter. You can go back to the previous classes. At the beginning of the 8th chapter, we discussed the 8 questions that Arjuna put to Lord Krishna and the answers that Lord Krishna gave to Arjuna. Samyak avadharya anusthaya yogi param prakrishtam aishwaram sthanam upayadi pripadyate. And that yogi reaches and attains the supreme spiritual realization. He realizes the fact that he is not just this physical body, but he is the Atman. His true nature is the Atman, the transcendental spiritual reality that is immanent in everyone, that is omnipresent everywhere. So who is the highest spiritual person? The highest spiritual person is one who experiences his spiritual affinity, his spiritual oneness with everyone else. That is much more difficult to attain than practicing some austerities, the practicing charity and generosity, or studying scriptures, or practicing certain rituals. They are all good, no doubt. They are very good. But the highest spiritual status goes to the one who every minute experiences his spiritual oneness, his spiritual unity with the whole existence. Not only human beings, whole existence. And every minute he will be practicing his spiritual oneness with the whole creation. Such a person is called yogi. So that is the significance of the 28th verse. That's why certain words are very, very important here. Idam viditva sarvam atyedi. The yogi who understands that there are these two paths, northern path and southern paths. And he understands one is a gradual journey to the highest spiritual realization, but not when living in this world, but out after death. But a real yogi, even while living in this world, he may be working, he may be engaged all the time in secular duties and responsibilities. He may be liberated. So you find one of the most wonderful and extraordinary dialogue that you find in the Mahabharata is a dialogue between a butcher and a saint. And you something very interesting. A saint who practiced austerities for a long time. He was sitting under a tree. He practiced for many, many years. But he felt he had become a mighty big saint. That's a problem with him. So one day it so happened that he heard some twigs are falling from the top branch of the tree under which he was sitting, and he looked up. He found two tiny birds. They were making noises. So he got angry because these birds had the audacity to disturb his meditation, and he had accumulated some occult powers. So he looked at them, and the birds turned into ashes, burned to ashes. And he was very happy. And he got up from the seat, and he went about walking, begging for alms, as used to practice in ancient India. And also in the medieval times in Europe, the Franciscan friars and others, and also in Russia, the Russian Orthodox monks, mystics. You can see them in the way of a pilgrim, the pilgrim goes about asking for alms. So like that, this yogi, this is not a yogi, of course. He was not a yogi, he had not become a yogi yet, of course. As we are going to find out. And he went to a home and he found there was nobody outside. So he shouted, Bhavadi Bhiksham Dehi, is an ancient Sanskrit statement, which means, please give me alms. Is an auspicious way of asking for alms. And then a lady from inside the home shouted back, saying, Sir, please wait a minute. And this man was outraged. A lady, a housewife, dared to ask me to wait. The moment he got angry within his mind, the lady replied, Sir, don't get angry. There are no birds here for you to burn to ashes. So this man was surprised. So he was practicing meditation for some time. So remember, when you practice spiritual qualities, spiritual austerities, you develop one quality, you'll be able to look into your own mind. And when you make a mistake, you'll be able to recognize that mistake. Those who don't care for anything, they will never they will happily live in this world without understanding that they have made mistakes while living for 100 years in the world. So those are very, very crude and had no interest in spiritual values. They will never be able to turn the flashlight into their own mind. So this man had the humility. Mother, excuse me, how did you know that this incident happened far away from your home? Or she said, look here, son, I just look after my household duties. That's all I do. But by doing this and by meditation, I could understand this. Then who is a teacher? This man asked. The lady said, I am my teacher. You go this way, you travel several miles from here. She gave the direction and he went. He followed her direction and he went, reached there. And in fact, he eventually reached a butcher shop. Surprisingly. He was surprised. The lady had directed him to a butcher shop. And there a butcher was sitting doing his duty. Certainly not a spiritual duty, you may believe. And if you are a vegetarian, you won't expect him to be a great spiritual teacher. That's what we are going to find out. And the butcher, as if he was anticipating this gentleman's arrival. And he had the humility to tell him. Then the butcher asked him, so you were sent by the lady? And before this man opened his mouth, the butcher asked him, so you were sent by the lady? He was surprised the butcher could understand everything that happened to him that day morning. And he asked him for instruction. This long dialogue between the butcher and this man who had left his home and went to a forest and meditated for several years is called Vyadha Gita. Now, it is, from a philosophical perspective, it is as great as Bhagavad Gita. It comes in the Mahabharata. But because of Shankaracharya's commentary, Bhagavad Gita became so supreme, universal. Because Shankaracharya wrote a commentary on this book and he brought in all the great spiritual, philosophical implications on these verses. Now, how this Vyadha story, again in the Mahabharata it says, when he was very young, he went to a forest and practiced meditation for years and years and years. After realizing, after becoming a Jivan Mukta, he didn't continue living in the forest. He came back and he took up his job. His father was a butcher. That was his hereditary job. What it means is, of course, the story should not be read too much into literally, but it has a great message. Whatever we may be doing, one can be liberated even by living in this world. So the Shankaracharya, he emphasizes this point. There are many other Upanishad bhashyas where Shankaracharya say ihaiva, ihaiva, ihaiva. That means in this world, by living in this world, while doing all the duties and responsibilities, one can be spiritually liberated. Spirituality can be practiced even when we are doing when we are engaged in our so-called secular responsibilities. Then you know what happens? The secular become spiritual. That's what happens. So we will have interaction.
Pranam Swamiji.
Yeah.
So, in Gita, many places Lord Krishna uses metaphors, but when he discusses these paths of Shukla Gati and Krishna Gati, he's very specific in describing them, like day and like the Uttarayana and all that. How literally is that to be interpreted versus like a metaphor?
No, as I mentioned, this, eschatology is not as important as metaphysics. Metaphysics deal with the higher aspects of philosophy. So, it's a well-known concept. You can find it mentioned in many of the other Upanishads, Vedic literature. Historically speaking, Gita introduces three important subjects in a very organized way. One is Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga and Jnana Yoga. So after Gita, in the later Sanskrit classics, you don't find much elaborate discussion on these two parts of eschatological movement after death. So the last time it is referred to and elaborately explained is in the Mahabharata. It's in the context of Bhishma's passing away.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, please. Yeah. It's not clear. I think you have to unmute, yeah.
At the beginning of every service, you recite a mantra that is similar to what you taught today about detachment and detachment from the result on the higher path, which is one of the things I think Krishna and Arjuna talked about in the 7 questions that Arjuna asked Krishna. I think he also talks about detachment. So you say something at the very end that is Om Tat Sat, and is that mantra for detaching from the final result?
Could you mean the later part was not clear in the do you mention? Are you referring to something I said by describing the 28th verse?
In the beginning and the end of every service, you recited prayer.
Oh, yeah.
Om Tat Sat.
Yeah, Om Tat Sat. Yeah, I understand. So today I did not conclude this with that formal conclusion because I don't want to begin the ninth chapter in the next class. So I want to explain a few more things about the 28th verse. Then I want to formally conclude the eighth chapter, and then we'll begin the ninth chapter in the next class. That's the plan. So today I did not conclude the eighth chapter because Om Tat Sadidi, etc. I want to explain, and then before that there are a few more things to be said about the 28th verse because it's a very important concept, and the idea that one can be spiritually liberated even while being engaged in everyday activity. There are great examples. So I want to elaborate further on that idea, and then we'll conclude. That's a plan. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. So we will conclude now. Thank you so much. Okay. Namaste. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.